Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm talking about the wonderful series Outlander, Blood of My Blood with actor Hermione Corfield and showrunner and executive producer Matthew B. Roberts. And Matthew, starting with you, I love how you had this initial spark of the idea of what if Claire's parents didn't die in the car crash that we all know about from the original series? And I was interested in how just that one initial thought really led to all the different kind of tangents and elements in telling such a broad and expansive story in this landscape.
Well, you hit on it. That's actually what inspired the show. When I first started thinking about a prequel, you know, obviously the thread in the books of Ellen and Brian was there, but I just couldn't figure out how to extend that past, maybe a season, maybe two. You get out of that, and then I was reading a script for Outlander, and Claire in it has a line where she mentions her parents, and I put it down and I thought, what if they didn't die? What if that accident, they lived, and, what if that accident was in Scotland, and what if they went through the stones? And then it's just snowballed from there, and it opened up a bunch of new tributaries off this kind of river, this main Outlander river. And then I think that the other thing that really I wanted to explore wasn't just showing two parallel paths, but if they intertwine, because the Outlander, as I say, the root system of Outlander is all intertwined. All these, it's always surprising when you read a new book and you go, oh my God, that person knows that person. And then how did they, So I thought we could do that on Blood of My Blood as well.
I love that. And Hermione, it's so fantastic that you and Jeremy Irvine already knew each other because you'd worked on a film together about 10 years ago. And, especially in the relationship that the two of you are playing on screen, it's not just seeing them meet for the first time, it's also playing their relationship several years in. And so how do you feel like that history that you already had with Jeremy really helped you to find, especially the latter parts of their relationship as you were figuring out all of these different points between them?
Well, I think it definitely helped to have that familiarity and that trust. We also see the characters go through so much as a couple and individually. And, I think you have to be quite acrobatic and flexible in that respect in terms of, how they are as a pairing. They have times where they're always in love, but there's times where they're going through difficult periods as a couple when they're together and also separated. And so, we're playing a whole landscape of the relationship, and as you said, we meet them once they're already married, and in quite deep, not in quite deep, in very deep, they're married. Yeah, I think it really helped with that and gave us a sort of head start in terms of building the chemistry, but also establishing a trust so that we could go to those places together. Because Jeremy has a lot of stuff, particularly with the World War One, the repercussions of that, which they're dealing with as a couple. So yeah.
Matt, I also wanted to ask you about, having these two characters fall in love with the idea and the minds of each other before they even get the chance to meet through these letters that they send back and forth, especially because I've heard that comes from some of your own personal family history. And I was interested in how that also really inspired it.
It did. My father had met his wife, not my mother, but his wife that way. They met over, emails and chat room, and they never physically saw each other. And I was taking him. He asked me to take him to the airport, and he had said, he was going to go meet this woman, and I just, casually said, well, what does she look like? And and he said, I haven't seen her. And I said, and she hadn't seen him. And I said, what? You're going to blind? This is like the blindest date of all time. And I said, well, what happens if you get there and it just, and he goes, it's okay. I already love her. And just remember that. So, and when he came home, I picked him up. He got free airport service from me. So I picked him up and took him home, and he decided to retire and move up to where she lived, and they got married, and they lived happily until he passed away of cancer. So it was a really cool love story. So when we were starting to craft Henry and Julia, knowing that he was in the war and knowing that she was holding down the fort in England and doing her part in the war effort there, is how do we connect these two people? How would they have met? And it just, was easy. Like maybe it's through letters, and the letter writing between them. Once you see it on screen, I think it's really easy to understand when they first see each other, how they have already fallen madly in love. And it just so happens that, they like what each other looks like too.
And Hermione, as much as there's the necessary chemistry between you and Jeremy, there is the fact that the two of you are falling in love with each other without sharing a single scene together right at the beginning. And there's kind of an art form to it, because it's about how is she fundamentally changing as a person from the act of falling in love, is kind of the way that we see it. Her mannerisms change, her charisma and her energy is completely different. And so how did you find all those details and how to do it in scenes where essentially sometimes it's just you by yourself reading or writing a letter?
I think one of the things that really struck me about Julia is she does spend a lot of time on her own. She's quite a solitary creature, and I think there's a loneliness there that you see, and Henry's equally lonely. So I think when she first sees his letter, it's first, I think it strikes a chord with her because she's an empathetic person. So she says, she feels someone reaching out and saying help, and she wants to respond and say, "You're not alone." And then from there, I think it becomes romantic, and she falls in love with his words and the way that he communicates and his lyricism, and she recognizes that they are sort of kindred spirits, they're soulmates. And I think she feels less lonely. I think she relaxes into herself, and she just ignites a sort of passion. I think she's quite a reserved person, perhaps maybe before she discovers love. I think it opens up a new pathway that maybe she hadn't quite explored yet. That's not to say I think she's an independent woman. I don't think she was closed off from the world, but I think that finding true love and passion really ignites something different in her.
And obviously, such a central plot point for the two of them with Julia and Henry is the moment where they get into the car accident, because that's something that, fans of Outlander know is a plot point for Claire's parents already. And then what does it look like when she disappears, and what is that moment for both of them? And so I wanted to ask both of you about just filming that scene and shaping that scene because of the importance of it to the storytelling in the series.
I mean, that was a crazy day because we actually got in it was one of those things where it was like, you have to look like you're wet coming out of the water. And then we got to the point where we're like, should we just get in the river? Because at this point, we're sort of splashing ourselves with cold water. It's actually taking a lot longer. So we just went down into like up to our shoulders, or maybe like up to our chest, and then actually crawled out the water. So it was cold. It was very cold. And then that location as well is in the middle of nowhere. Like there's a house where you can go and have a quick shower, but like it's very much up in the Highlands in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, it was beautiful. I mean, it's always so beautiful and dramatic wherever you're filming when you're outside the studio. So yeah, it was a pretty fun day.
And for you, Matt, what was the process and space of really shaping that moment? Because, that's the initial idea that sparked the entire series for you.
Well, with so many elements to put it all together, because, the car, they didn't really crash the car. So we had to build that in visual effects, and the stag is also visual effects. So, we're just constantly the scene is evolving, and then we did, with Henry and Julia going through the rapids until they would end up where they do crawl out. It's all filmed so out of order, but when we finally strung it all together and I saw all the elements, I knew it worked, because obviously the question is going to be, will they die in a car crash? What happened to them? Well, as Hermione said, even when you're in the Highlands right now, it's vast and it's wild. So in 1924, I can't imagine another car drove by anytime soon. And if it did, finding these bodies would have been nearly impossible. And I think that's what we were going for. And I think we finally strung it all together. So it gave me a sense of relief, to tell you the truth.
Hermione, there's also an element to Julia that the way that she tries to figure out what's even happened to me, is this something that's some sort of reality or what could this possibly be, comes from all of the things that we've seen her learn before. She's someone who's incredibly well read, who self-studies, who loves literature, and even just that idea and that line about, have I gone through the looking glass? We see how that shapes the idea. And so how did you feel like the details of everything that she self-teaches really fundamentally shaped the way that she processes this entire experience and this complete change and shift in her life?
I think Julia is a really interesting combination of incredibly practical and able, and also very romantic, and would be the first to believe, with enough evidence, would be the first to believe, in fairies and in alternate universes. And, she's a really interesting combination in that sense. I think she is quite a romantic person at heart, and she's got her head screwed on, but she's got this romanticism and love of stories. So I think on the one hand, when she gets there, she's thinking practically as to how did I get here? How do I get home? Why has this happened? Where am I? How do I find a map? But then on the other hand, she's thinking, is this an alternate reality? Am I in a dream? Am I in someone's story? She's an interesting combination. I think that continues to play in the first season and what we're shooting now. That kind of her constant sort of movement between practicality and the facts, and believing in the otherworldly.
I love that, and Matt, as Hermione was just describing there with Julia, the fact that she's someone who's very pragmatic, but also has this romanticism. It also feels like that's really true for Ellen as well as a character. And how did you want to have these kind of tangible threads or shared traits between these two women, despite the fact that they are also fundamentally completely different characters with completely different life experiences?
It's funny when you first initially write the characters, you think one thing where, oh, wow, there's some similarities. And then when the actors bring them to life, for me, it's magic, because I don't see a lot of similarities. I mean, they're both strong people, but we have a lot of strong people. I don't kind of go down the road of strong female character. You're either a strong character or you're not a strong character. And so, but we have a lot of strong characters. And so the traits that they have are kind of fitting for how they were raised and their environments. And I think when you maybe you've seen this in the trailer, when they come together, you'll see that maybe Julia's strength in one area helps propel Ellen to do something she might not have done. And then vice versa, down the road, you might see that where Ellen has a strength that Julia hasn't found yet, and she can, engender that into Julia.
Yeah, I love that description of it. Hermione, there's also the aspect of the fact that all of a sudden going through this experience and being in a completely different timeline and trying to piece it all together, she is smart enough to know that she can't try to explain this to anybody else, and that for her own safety as well, it's more important to not reveal anything early on. And so she's really constantly masking herself. And how did you step into playing this character and looking at the different ways that she's constantly concealing certain emotions or certain details from the people around her?
Yes, that was actually, I would say, the most difficult thing about the character is that choice of how she plays her hand, and the most interesting, I think, at what stage and how does she play her hand. And I think that's been an ongoing conversation, definitely with Matt and also with the directors along the way, where at the beginning she has to conceal herself. She's wearing an armor, and information, if any, she knows, she has the intelligence to know that if she tried to explain that to someone, they go, you're mad, or you're a witch, burn her. There's so many terrible things that could happen. Once she's established she's in a different time period, I think she immediately goes into sort of shutdown mode of just gather information as much as possible, absorb as much as you can, and strategize. And so I think what's cool and interesting about the journey of Julia in season 1 and now having started season 2 is that is a constant thing that we are looking at, is how does she play her hand when she's faced with certain circumstances. And I think the key is to make it interesting and dynamic and retaining agency within a realistic realm. You know, you don't want her to suddenly, I don't know, be able to run the country, or like, you know, it needs to be done in a way that's believable and exciting and you're on board with her, but it's still a struggle, because that's, you know, that's interesting to watch. And it's people want to watch people struggle and try and strategize.
There's also an element to the story between Julia and Henry where we get to see the aftermath of going through the experience of war for both of them, you know, and even just seeing the kind of way that trauma takes over at night when he's sleeping for him and the way that he wakes up. And this was obviously at a time period where nobody really understood or talked about these things. And it's really beautiful to see the way that they kind of connect and support each other through all of this. And so I wanted to ask both of you about getting to explore that side of their relationship and how that also creates a lot of closeness between them.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, again, we spoke about this. I remember I was saying I wanted Julia to struggle with it, because I thought it was too, you know, when we have those snapshots of them in their lives before they got to 1700s, I didn't feel that I wanted it to be entirely rosy, because that's not realistic. And I think we do find Julia and Henry at a different point to Ellen and Brian. You know, they're in that fresh early stages of love. We're in a point where we know each other inside out, every single flaw. And so when you see that struggle, yeah, it's part of the love between them. And Henry relies on Julia massively as an emotional support. And Julia struggles with that, of course. She's been living as, you know, before that point, she was living on her own and had herself to worry about, I'm sure, other things. But, you know, and suddenly she's got the person that she loves the most struggling hugely with his mental health. And I wanted there to be a level of strain for her, so that, because that's real. I don't think you can, you know, you can't always give 1,000% when someone, you know, when you're living with someone in that state.
And for you, Matt, how did you want to explore that side of their relationship and that side of the story in the show?
Well, you know, it really coming, you know, obviously from the United States, you know, when I moved over to Scotland and we did Outlander for all the years, every time I went to a town or a village, there would always be a World War I memorial there with just hundreds and hundreds of names on it. And they have a channel, at least in Scotland, called Yesterday, and it's always showing, it's always about World War I. And you start to learn how this war impacted that country, and it still does to this day. They lost an entire generation of human beings. And with Henry going through that in the trenches, and Julia going through that back at home, you know, I think sometimes people forget that the people back home suffered quite a bit as well. Maybe not the physical shelling and the bullets, but there was loss. I mean, Julia literally sees dead people coming through. You know, I mean, these letters, and you know, most of them were probably in the kill pile. You know what I mean? These are letters going off to their parents, and that was the last thing they would ever read. So I knew that we had to impact these people with this, and not just for an episode. It wasn't something that was going to be this episode and then was just going to go away. So to tell the story in a true way, in a realistic way that felt true to the characters, it has to carry on, and it will carry on. So.
Yeah. Hermione, it's also fascinating to watch a character for who agency has always been something important to her. You know, we see that she's part of the suffragette movement in the wartime period. And then all of a sudden to be transported back to a completely different time period and to be there as a pregnant woman, unmarried, to the people around her, it completely changes the way that she's going to be perceived and received by every single person. And what was that experience in terms of playing a character who's very forthright and very open with her feelings, and then suddenly all of that's completely stripped away from her?
I think the important thing was to make sure that it was realistic how she was as realistic as, you know, being in another century from time travel. But yeah, how would you respond if you're put in that scenario? And I think it would you wouldn't try and speak out and be as you were. I think perhaps you would at the beginning. And I think when she first arrives at Leathers, she does answer back and she does say, do you know, I'm not who you think I am. I don't know why I'm here. And then because there's a time jump at the next time we see her, and she's been there a little bit longer, because because the series plays with time a bit. We see her a few months later as well when she's I think the first time we see her, she's been at Leathers for about a month or so, I'd say.
Yeah.
So we see her kind of in the role of maidservant, that was the tricky thing because it's, she's never obviously going to be comfortable in that role, but she can't always be in a state, she tries to run away several times, but she can't always be in a state of panic because she's also playing a role. So I think it was, once she starts to get a kind of a hold on her surroundings, I think that's when she kind of starts to retain a bit more agency and she starts to get a little bit more power and a little bit more of her agency back, because certainly at the beginning it's hard for her to. Yeah, it was a real challenge, to be honest. That was a real challenge.
There's a moment, I won't give it away, but there's a moment where she, through her, I think, cleverness, gets that agency, and it's a way of helping her move forward. And it's, I think, unexpected and very clever. It's also something that you would think that for me, when we first talked about it, it was she would absolutely do this because of how determined and strong she is as a person. And it's a cool moment. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I bet you'll guess when you see it.
Yeah. She's also a caged bird. That's how I think about her as well in this scenario. She's a caged bird or a caged tiger at times, I'd say, maybe less of
I would say that it's not caged bird unless it's like, a raven, because ravens to me are like so unbelievably smart and clever, and they're going to figure out at some point how to get out of that cage.
Yes. Yeah.
Matt, there's also something about writing in this particular time period that almost creates really natural obstacles to couples wanting to be together or couples being separated and not being able to find each other. You can't just go on the internet and find each other and reach out via social media, and they don't even know where to send a letter to, but they're still writing letters because that's how they originally connected. And so how did you feel like the time period kind of really actually naturally lends itself to this storytelling and this idea of obstacles in relationships?
Well, for me as a writer, I love writing in this period. One, it's just cool. Once I've been 10 years in the period in the dialect, so I really enjoy writing. I start to think like that now. But in a modern love story, you don't have a lot of conflicts. You don't have a lot that keeps you apart. You can instantly text somebody or email, or you can go and see them instantly. And what are the conflicts? Parents don't really hold people apart. Jobs don't really hold people apart. So it's even long distance relationships are easier now with FaceTime and, Zooms and things. So I think people who are writing modern romances or modern love stories have it harder than we do, because we have everything keeping them apart. And time and space and fate. So even, the magic there. So.
And lastly, for you, Hermione, I wanted to just ask about the friendship between Julia and Brian that starts to exist between the two of them, and how that starts to change things for her and feeling like she does have someone who is a safe space, who's feeling protective towards her.
Yeah, I think they have a very special dynamic, and I think it's really fun to play. Feels very siblingy. And me and Jamie say whenever I go back to having my dark hair, he's like, we actually do look a little bit like siblings. I was like, we can't say that because we supposedly also look like Sam and Katrina. Yeah, I think he finds a lot of they at the beginning, I think they're kind of not using each other, but they're helping each other out with their individual problems, and then over time I think there's a real affection there. And they go through, some periods of distrust, which I won't tell you any more about. Maybe you've seen it, I'm not sure. But then they, have kind of a lovely friendship forms that, it's very sweet. It's very, Yeah, it feels very familial in a very like warm and loving kind of way. It's very
Yeah.
sweet.
I love
Very,
that.
it's very fateful, is what it is. That's the way we're going with this. It's very
Fateful, did you
fateful.
say?
Yes. Yes.
Which
Fateful,
is
not hateful. Faithful, meaning it was maybe destined.
which feels like a great way to
Ah.
describe the series as a whole. Well,
Yeah.
I really, really appreciate both of you talking about this, and congratulations on amazing episodes that I've seen so far. So thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.